Hello, guys. Today we're going to be talking about the Trump Congress and the issues with the Trump Congress. I had predicted before Trump got elected that he was going to get elected, but I knew that the House was going to be a serious issue for him. The Senate was pretty easy, going to be pretty easy for them to flip because they shouldn't have lost in the first place. But with redistricting, the way some of the House districts were redistricted, I knew it was going to be a difficult situation for Trump. And now Trump has uphill battle for at least the next 2 years on getting things done with the current Congress.
Donald Trump is beginning his second term in a familiar place, with a trifecta. Republicans will also control the House and the Senate, just like when he took office in 2017.
We all look back and recognize that the Republican Party was not fully prepared for that moment. We are not going to make those mistakes again.
This is a very, very different Republican Party and a very different trifecta than what we saw 8 years ago.
Here's why. These senators are sorted based on how often they vote with each other. This is the 115th Senate, the one that started with Trump's first term in 2017. The farther to the left they are, the more they vote with Democrats. The farther to the right, the more with Republicans. For example, here are the senators that were the only no votes against a bipartisan spending bill to stop a government shutdown. These Republicans tend to vote with Democrats the least. There's a similar narrative on the Democratic side. For example, here are the senators that voted against many of Trump's cabinet nominees. And here in the middle are the senators like Joe Manchin, the only Democrat in 2018 to vote to confirm Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and Lisa Murkowski, the only Republican not to. If we move forward to the latest session we have data on,
I think with those two, Senator Manchin, his issue was that he was in a red state and he was going to get kicked out. Now, why Murkowski is the way that she is really hard to say because Alaska is pretty safely red. Now, Susan Collins up in Maine, it's more reasonable why she's a moderate and why she has to toe the line because she won't get elected again, and it makes sense that she would represent a purple state by being a purple senator. But Murkowski, it's really hard to understand why she's such an establishment shill and such a sellout. But
the 118th Senate that just ended, and compare that to the 115th, you'll see there are fewer members in the center. And importantly, these are the senators who won't be a part of the 119th Congress that Trump will work with in his second term.
The center of the Congress has really been hollowed out. You have people like Jon Tester, who lost his race and aren't going to be around anymore. Mitt Romney decided not to run again. Same thing for now independents, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin.
We got to stop demonizing each other. We've got to argue over ideas. That's fine, but not personalities.
And so the middle is going to be very, very narrow, consisting of really Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. But
yeah, Susan Collins, she makes sense why she's in the middle. Murkowski, I don't really understand. Some of the seats, like Jon Tester, that was definitely going to go the other way. With the Arizona seat, it is amazing how Carrie Lake had lost that. I really feel like she really screwed up a lot of things to lose that seat. But the whole problem is if you're in a state like that, it's hard to walk the line. It's hard for Jon Tester to be a moderate and be a Democrat when there's going to be a Republican going against him. Like, you have to be really moderate and you have to really be on top of things and popular in your state to maintain, that flip seat like that. In a state like Montana, that is really difficult. I think it's really difficult for Collins to maintain her red seat in the state of Maine, and it's amazing that she has it. But obviously, with polarized politics, we're going to be going to the polls, and there's not going to be as many Congress people in the middle.
But by and large, Republicans and Democrats have each retreated to their own camps, and the possibility for deal making, therefore, is far narrower.
Those camps have changed too. Let's look at the Senate and the House at the beginning of Trump's first term. Here's how many Republican senators and representatives endorsed Trump in 2016. And here's how many vocally opposed him.
We got a chance to set the agenda. What's the most important thing? Clearly, it was the Supreme Court.
The Republican Party basically used Trump to drive through their agenda. The Republican
And I disagree with that. The Republican Party, finally, they did something with the Supreme Court and not letting Obama fill that seat, which was the right thing to do in an election year. But I don't think they used Trump to push through their agenda. Trump had wanted the corporate tax cuts. He wanted the tax cuts in general to spur the economy. Whether you think Trump is a narcissist or not, he wanted economic growth out the roof, and he wanted those tax cuts for that reason. Now, did Trump get all the infrastructure things he wanted done, and did he get the deregulation done? No, the Republicans didn't work with him hard enough on that. The Republicans, they also promised to simplify the tax code to be able to do it on a postcard, and Paul Ryan failed at that, which they didn't have a huge majority. And I think most of their issue was with the Senate at that time. But the Republican Party wasn't really running the thing. Trump's been running the game the whole time. There were just a lot of Republicans who opposed him that he had to kind of work out with in the last Congress.
Party wanted tax cuts and used Donald Trump to get those tax cuts. The tables have now turned.
Vote for the Trump-endorsed conservative.
Many of the lawmakers in Congress right now owe their seats to Trump's victory, and he is now going to drive the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President.
That's clear to see if we look at those in the new Congress that opposed him in 2024 and those that endorsed him.
We're overwhelmed.
Yeah, this is amazing how unified the Trump party got behind Trump. They really realized that it was not going to work out in being opposed to Trump, being opposed to Trump's ideals. MAGA overwhelmingly won over the Republican Party, and people like Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, they moved over to the Democrats. The Republican establishment, a lot of it has been disenfranchised, and they're going over to the Democratic Party. And there are middle of the road people who've been pushed out, like Tulsi and RFK Jr., who've been forced to become Republicans because there's no space for them left in the Democrat Party or on the left. But it is amazing how many endorsed Trump this time around. Basically unanimous on both sides. The Senate, obviously, it makes more sense why they were more opposed to him, because the Senate does not change as quickly as the House does, right? The House gets reelected every 2 years. The Senate, they're on 6-year rotations, with a third of it being each election. So they're going to experience less change overall. And since they experience less change, the incumbents stay there longer. People get to know the names of the incumbents, so it's hard to change those elections because they're more in the system at that point.
Overwhelmingly focused on advancing Donald Trump's agenda.
There's no daylight between their agenda and what they envision and what we envision for the House.
Speaker Mike Johnson comes into office with what is going to be the narrowest.
And this is the big issue, is that their majority is barely a majority, right? They're going to have to get through everything basically unanimously with 220 representatives, right? If it's going to be a partisan bill they're getting through, well, 220 people to agree exactly on the details is going to be hard. And Trump is really going to have to put on the pressure to get everybody to fall in line to get things done. Because I don't think the Democrats are going to be on with most of it. There are some big things that I think they're getting behind. I think they're getting behind some of the food reforms and stuff that Trump's going to do. but I'm not sure that they would be behind any tax cuts and how some of those other more controversial things are going to go. It remains to be seen what's going to be done with some of those more controversial type ideas, like balancing the budget. That's going to be a difficult thing for to actually get done, even though there are people who want to get rid of government waste on both sides. For example, Bernie would be all for cutting the military budget, but the mandatory spending and Social Security, I don't think they're going to mess with. And we have to mess with some of those big issues to get the country back on track.
Majority in decades. He starts out in theory with 220 to 215 seats, but that diminishes pretty rapidly. So, in effect, Mike Johnson, if he is going to pass a bill on party lines, has to have...
And that's one of Trump's issues is finding people who are political to fill his cabinet. Well, he can't really take that many from the House. He's already taken a couple, which has slimmed the House down even more, right? In reality, the Republican Party should have been doing more. They should have had a majority of 240 or something like that. Trump could fill his cabinet, and they would still have plenty to get everything on board. But just the way the lines were drawn, there was so much focus on the presidential level at that point, just because of the change of candidates and everything, that really screwed up the Republican Party. If it would have been Biden versus Trump would have won, I think, by 5 points at least nationally. And the Republicans would have taken over the Congress. But switching out the candidates, kind of had everybody off balance, and there were people who were going to vote for Kamala because she was going to be the first woman president. So their majority now is really in trouble.
Every single Republican on board.
If Republicans are not united, our agenda falls apart.
And to make matters more complicated, when Speaker Johnson does have the votes, everyone has to physically be there to vote.
Something as small as a hospital stay could derail Speaker Mike Johnson's majority, and that is in addition to political problems.
And in the Senate with fewer moderates, Senate Majority Leader John Thune will have a harder time reaching a consensus.
We are excited to reclaim the majority and to get to work with our colleagues in the House to enact President Trump's agenda.
John Thune only narrowly won his race to be the Republican leader. He is going to have to watch his right flank if he wants to stay in power, and that is going to mean a whole lot more of accommodating of Donald Trump.
For Trump to get the funding for his immigration and deportation plans and his big planned tax cuts, he's going to need a unified Republican caucus, and for everyone to be able to show up to vote.
Yeah, I think with what Trump's going to have to focus on is he's going to have to focus on doing some things in good faith now, doing what he can on the border, getting those things done, even without too much of the Congress on board. I'm sure they're going to handle the border issue, but how much more the big reforms are going to get done, I don't know. I don't think they're going to get those done, but Trump can use the executive branch to get done what he needs to get done, and then I think everybody else will be on board, and the next election, the midterm, they can get some more people in there. I think they're going to be basically fine in the Senate with their majority in the Senate, but the House is a really difficult one to balance till the midterms, and I think that's going to be one of the biggest troubles for Trump, is he's going to have to constantly put on the pressure to keep things going in the right direction for our country as a whole.